Have you ever heard someone try to attack the Islamic narrative using the Quran itself? It's a classic move. They'll say, look at the Quran. It gives Isa all these incredible, spectacular miracles. But where are Prophet Muhammad's? We're going to tackle that head-on today.
You've probably heard it before, right? It's an argument specifically designed to put you on the back foot, to make it seem like the Quran elevates one prophet over the other, creating a kind of internal contradiction.
And when you look at it on the surface, their case seems pretty strong. They point to these verses about Isa creating living birds from clay, curing people who were born blind, even bringing the dead back to life. And then they look at you and say, okay, so where are Muhammad's miracles on that scale? It's a tough question, meant to make you stumble.
But here's the thing. What if that entire argument, the very foundation it's built on, is just completely wrong? Well, thanks to the work of Dr. Hani on the Marvelous Quran channel, we can see that this attack isn't based on what the Quran actually says, but on a total misreading of its own language. Let's dive in.
You see, the problem isn't in the Quran. The problem is that for centuries, these specific verses have been interpreted using outside stories, traditions, and legends. But the real key to understanding them isn't out there somewhere. It's locked right inside the pages of the Quran itself.
The tool to unlock this is a method called Abrahamic locution, and the idea is actually pretty simple. You treat the Quran as its own self-contained dictionary. So to understand what a word truly means, you don't just grab a modern translation, you have to look at how the Quran itself uses that exact same word everywhere else it appears. And when you do that, oh man, the picture completely changes.
Okay, so let's start with the big one. The most famous story. Isa takes a bit of clay, shapes it into a bird, breathes on it, and poof, it becomes a real, living bird and flies away. It sounds amazing, right? A true spectacle. But let's see what the Quran's own dictionary says about the words being used.
This is where it gets fascinating. When we apply Abrahamic locution, we find something incredible. The word used for clay, al-tin, is used in other parts of the Quran to refer to the people of Egypt. And the word for birds, al-tayr, is consistently used as a powerful metaphor for angels or for divinely guided teachers.
So you put that together, and what's happening? Isa isn't making a literal bird out of literal clay. He is fashioning a person from among the people and, through guidance, elevating them to become like the angels, a spiritual teacher. The miracle isn't physical creation, it's spiritual transformation.
Okay, so if the bird story is a metaphor for spiritual guidance, then what about healing the sick? The next supposed miracle is curing the blind and the leper. But again, when we look at the precise Arabic verb the Quran uses, we realize this isn't about physical disease, it's about healing a false accusation.
Let's break this down. First, you have to understand the stigma. In that time and place, if you were born blind or had leprosy, people believed God had cursed you. You were an outcast. It was a social death sentence. Second, look at the word. The specific Arabic verb used is ubriyu. Its primary meaning isn't to physically cure, but to declare clear, to absolve or to prove innocent. So the act itself, Asa was publicly declaring these people innocent of the horrible accusation that God had cursed them.
Just think about how profound that is. He wasn't performing a physical healing. He was healing their reputation. He was healing a false, soul-crushing accusation and restoring their human dignity. This was a miracle of social justice.
All right, that brings us to the biggest one of all, the showstopper. Reviving the dead. Surely this one has to be literal, right? How can you possibly interpret this any other way?
The answer yet again comes from applying that same consistent rule. We have to let the Quran define its own terms. What does the Quran itself say dead means?
And here it is, the definitive proof, straight from the source. In Surah 16, verse 20, the Quran is speaking about people who are physically alive and walking around, and it says of them, quote, they are dead, not alive. It couldn't be any more direct. The Quran itself establishes that being dead can be a spiritual state, a metaphor for being completely lost to guidance. So, when the Quran says that Isa revived the dead, it's describing his essential mission. It was to revive souls, not bodies. To call those spiritually lifeless people, who were dead, not alive, back to the guidance of Allah. It was a spiritual resurrection.
Now, these reinterpretations are incredibly powerful just based on the language, but there's one final absolute proof that locks this metaphorical understanding into place. It's an argument so fundamental that it makes the literal interpretation logically impossible from a Quranic perspective.
And it all comes down to the single most important concept in all of Islam, Tawheed, the absolute indivisible oneness of God. The Quran is crystal clear on this, from beginning to end. Only Allah is the creator. Allah alone creates. Period. It's a non-negotiable, foundational rule.
And that brings us to this powerful insight from Dr. Hani. The idea that anyone besides Allah literally creates life is not a Quranic miracle. It's a Quranic violation. It directly contradicts the core message of the entire book. Therefore, these stories must be understood metaphorically.
So it turns out the anti-Quran attacks were primarily based on the erroneous interpretations in the books of Tafseer. The so-called miracles of Isa were no miracles at all. And for sure, the Quran was correcting the erroneous claims that Christians made before the Quran.
This leads to a huge question then. How did these incorrect, literal interpretations get into our own books of commentary, the books of Tafsir? Because you can be sure that neither Prophet Muhammad nor his closest companions were the source of these ideas.
To be clear, these erroneous interpretations were brought in by the authors of the Tafsir books after they had learned them from the Christian communities they now lived among. This happened very quickly, starting in that first century after the Prophet's death during the Umayyad dynasty, and was then solidified in writing during the Abbasid dynasty.
And just like that, once you understand the history and the language, that whole anti-Quran argument just completely falls apart. The problem was never in the Quran. It was in the layers of interpretation that were built on top of it generations later, which leaves us with one final, powerful question to think about. If letting the Quran define its own terms is the key, what other established truths might need a second look?